I opened the second urn thinking it was a mistake, but inside was a letter from my dead husband. I owe you the truth. And the truth was, after 27 years of marriage, I had no idea he had another daughter living alone in the frozen woods. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now to catch our next jaw-dropping episodes. The snow had started falling again just as the last few guests drifted away from the cemetery. Vermont in early February didn't do anything gently. The wind bit into skin. The cold climbed inside bones and settled there like grief. Martha stood at the edge of the grave in a dark wool coat too big for her frame. Her gloved hands were clenched together, not in prayer, but in tension. She didn't cry. She hadn't all day. Not even when the pastor read the words she herself had selected. Not when the casket lowered into the earth, slow and final, disappearing beneath the hungry hush of white. A man with a red nose and watery eyes approached her with a nervous smile. He was a good man, he said, brushing a mitten across his coat sleeve. We'll miss him at the lodge. Martha gave a tight nod. Thank you for coming. That was it. No hugging, no lingering. People were eager to leave the frozen ground behind and head to warm homes and fireplaces. She didn't blame them. By the time she returned to the small cottage at the edge of the maple woods, the sky was heavy with dusk. The silence inside the house was unnatural, too perfect. She hung her coat, then walked through the living room, her boots still wet. The armchair where Richard had spent most evenings was vacant cushioned, slightly indented. His coffee cup still sat on the kitchen counter untouched since the morning he'd been rushed to the hospital. 3 days later he was gone. She took a breath that caught halfway down her chest. There was a knock at the door. When she opened it, a man in a courier uniform handed her a small box, brown-wrapped and sealed. Delivery for Martha Aldridge. I didn't order anything, she said quietly. It says urgent. Signature, please. She signed with the same pen she'd used to write thank you notes for the funeral flowers. When she shut the door, the house felt colder. She placed the package on the kitchen table. No return address. Just her name scrawled in fine black ink. She cut the tape with a kitchen knife. Inside was a small wooden box, walnut, smooth, polished. She froze. It looked nearly identical to the urn now sitting on the mantel, the one holding Richard's ashes from the crematorium. But this wasn't from the funeral home. There'd been no mention of a second urn. On top of the box was an envelope, pale yellow, no stamp, no address. Just one line written in the same sharp, impatient handwriting. I owe you the truth. Her throat tightened. She sat down slowly, like someone easing into something dangerous. The chair creaked beneath her. Her fingers hovered over the flap of the envelope, trembling slightly. She wasn't afraid, not exactly, but something ancient stirred in her, a warning, a whisper that said, don't open that. She opened it anyway. There was no date, no signature. Just a single sheet of paper with 6 words typed in the center. I owe you the truth, R. She stared at it unmoving for what felt like minutes. The silence around her felt charged, static. Richard's name had always carried weight. Even when they argued, he'd been the stable one, calm, predictable, not the kind of man who left cryptic messages with ashes in wooden boxes. She opened the urn. Inside was indeed ash. Slightly different in texture and color from the official one she'd received. She didn't know what to make of that. Her hands were still. Was this a mistake? Someone else's package? She looked back at the envelope. Her name was on it clear as day. Martha Aldridge. Her stomach turned. Her thoughts spun, connecting and disconnecting at wild speed. Her husband had been cremated at Burlington Memorial. There was one certificate, one pickup time. It had all been formal, controlled, clean. So what the hell was this? She stood suddenly overwhelmed and walked into the bedroom. Richard's closet was already half empty. She'd begun packing up the things she couldn't bear to see. The smell of cedar and old aftershave lingered. On a hunch, she reached for the suitcase he used for business trips. It was heavier than she remembered. Unzipping it revealed mostly socks and a shaving kit neatly packed. Underneath was a folder, blue, nearly invisible against the lining. She pulled it out. Inside were maps. Vermont, New Hampshire. Hand-drawn markings in red ink circled an area northeast of Stowe. Tucked in one of the plastic sleeves was a photo. Her fingers went numb. It was old, at least 20 years. The edges curled and faded. A woman, not Martha, stood in front of a cabin holding a baby. Richard stood next to her, younger tan, wearing that same crooked smile he always reserved for private moments. His hand was on the woman's shoulder. There was no doubt. That was her husband. And that child. Martha swallowed hard. A fog settled inside her chest. Disbelief battled with fury. She sat on the edge of the bed, photo in one hand, letter in the other, while the box of ash sat untouched on the kitchen table. This wasn't grief anymore. This was something else entirely. She rose, went back to the kitchen, and stared at the second urn. She wanted to scream. Instead, she whispered to the cold room, "Who were you, Richard?" The longer she stood there, the more the story she'd built over decades began to crack. The business trips, the unexplained weekends at the lodge, the cash withdrawals he said were for emergencies, the phone calls he'd taken outside, always quick, always dismissive. She never asked. She didn't want to be the kind of wife who questioned everything, but maybe she should have. She returned to the living room and lit the fireplace. The flames grew quickly, casting shadows across the room. The letter, now resting on her lap, looked more menacing in the firelight. She stared into the fire for a long time. Martha was not a woman prone to dramatics. She'd lived a quiet life, taught second grade for 32 years, baked apple pies for church events, kept her garden meticulous. She believed in order, in fairness, in letting the dead rest. But this was something that refused to die quietly. Richard had loved secrets, apparently. Loved them enough to pack them in walnut wood and send them to his widow like a parting gift. She got up again, restless. She moved to the mantel and looked at the official urn, then back to the one on the kitchen table. She placed them side by side, one labeled, one not, one expected, one a mystery. She laughed once, short and dry, and then she cried, not because she missed him, not because he was gone. She cried because everything she thought was true had become suspect in a single day. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and walked to the hall closet, pulling out an old leather journal. It had blank pages and a broken spine. She used to write in it before marriage, before life became too predictable to record. She opened to a clean page. In careful penmanship, she wrote, "Day 1. Richard is dead, but someone else sent me his ashes. And now I think my husband lied to me for 27 years. She closed the journal, placed it next to the urn, and looked again at the photo. The woman holding the baby looked happy, not suspicious, not threatened, not temporary. Happy. And that haunted Martha more than anything else. She stared at the photo until her eyes hurt. She no longer felt sorrow. She felt something else rising, a tremor of suspicion, of betrayal, of curiosity. She looked again at the box of ashes, then at the fire. She wasn't going to throw it away. Not yet. Because Richard owed her the truth, and she intended to collect. The morning after the second urn arrived, Martha sat alone at the dining room table, staring at a pile of folders she hadn't opened in years. They smelled faintly of mold and cedarwood. These were Richard's tax files, insurance policies, old bills, maps, receipts he'd insisted on keeping just in case. His handwriting ran across every margin like spider webs. The coffee in her mug had long gone cold. She had barely slept. The words from the letter kept replaying in her mind, "I owe you the truth." She had lived a life where questions were optional, where silence was a sign of stability. Now questions came roaring through her mind like a wildfire, unwelcome, destructive, but impossible to ignore. She pulled one file labeled discretionary from the stack. Inside were bank statements, but not from their usual account at Greenleaf Federal. The bank's name printed at the top corner was Unfamiliar Snow River Private Banking. The location Haven Ridge, a small mountain town about 3 hours north. There were regular deposits, nothing outrageous but not small either. Every 3 months, amounts like $2 or $300, $1, $900, $2, $7, $50, all signed under the alias Sparrow 17. She said it out loud, Sparrow 17. It sounded like a code or a password, but it was real. It had transactions, and Richard had hidden it. Her hands shook slightly as she turned the pages, discovering something stranger. One of the statements was printed with the name Richard Aldridge, scribbled out in thick black ink, sloppily, like someone had panicked and crossed it out too late. She sat back in her chair. What kind of man creates a second identity, hides money, and sends a second urn after his death? She already knew the answer. A man with something or someone to hide. By noon, she had packed a small bag and dressed in layers. She left a note on the kitchen counter more out of habit than purpose. No one checked in on her anymore, not since Richard's passing. The drive to Haven Ridge cut through ice-stiff pine trees and stretches of highway lined with snow. Her windshield wipers squeaked in mechanical rhythm as she played nothing on the radio. The silence suited her thoughts. When she arrived in town, the air was colder than in Burlington. Her boots crunched on frozen gravel as she stepped into the discreet glass and stone building marked Snow River Private Banking. The warmth inside was clinical. The receptionist, a young woman with a pin-straight ponytail, looked up from her screen. "Good afternoon, may I help you?" "Yes," Martha said, setting her purse down slowly. "I'm here to inquire about an account. It's under the name Sparrow 17. The receptionist's eyes flicked for a second, just a flicker, but Martha caught it. Recognition. "I'm sorry," the girl said with a polite professional smile. "I'm not authorized to discuss private accounts with anyone but the account holder. It's about my late husband, Richard Aldridge." The smile didn't move. "Even so, I'm afraid I can't." "Then get someone who can," Martha said, sharper than intended. Her voice echoed slightly in the glass space. A manager appeared shortly after, a balding man with nervous eyes and a striped tie too wide for his neck. He introduced himself as Mr. Keeler. "You said your husband held an account here." "I said the account was under Sparrow 17, Martha replied. "I have documentation showing his handwriting, his transfers, his initials. It's in that folder, right there." She dropped it on the counter. Mr. Keeler glanced at it, then at her. "I'll have to verify." "Of course you will," she snapped. "But you already know the name. Your receptionist flinched when I said it. And you're stalling." The words stunned even her. Mr. Keeler lowered his voice. "Mrs. Aldridge, the account you're referring to is highly confidential. If you're not the primary holder or a legal beneficiary, I buried the man 5 days ago," she hissed. "If I'm not entitled to know what else he was hiding, then who is?" He held her gaze longer than most men did, then looked away. "I'll see what I can do." He disappeared into the back folder in hand. She stood in that pristine lobby for nearly 20 minutes. During that time, 2 other clients walked in and were escorted to private rooms. Nobody looked at her. When Keeler returned, his face was stiff with corporate regret. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Aldridge. I can't share any further information." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Why?" "Because the real account holder isn't dead yet." Silence. She stepped closer. "Let me ask you something, Mr. Keeler. How often did you see him? Did he ever come in here with someone else? Did he ever hold a child's hand? Call someone sweetheart?" He blinked hard. She smiled without warmth. "That's what I thought." Martha turned and walked out without another word. The moment the cold air hit her face, something broke inside her. She didn't cry. Not this time. But her jaw clenched tight enough to ache. She gripped the car's steering wheel like it was her only anchor in the storm that was now her life. She didn't drive home. Instead, she parked at a gas station and sat in the car with the heat running. Her fingers dug through the old files again, flipping without focus, until she landed on something wedged between 2 travel receipts. A postcard. The ink was faded but still legible. It showed a snow-covered lake with mountains in the distance. A cabin stood on the shoreline, light spilling from the window. On the back, written in looping rushed script, "Lakewood cabin like I promised, always yours." No name, no date. She flipped it over again, staring at the picture. She couldn't be sure it was just a photo, but the shape of the cabin, the angle of the porch, it felt real. Not like a stock image, like a memory captured. She stared at the words, "always yours." Not hers, always someone else's. She sat back in the driver's seat, blinking at the windshield now frosted slightly from inside. That was when she decided. She turned the ignition key. The engine hummed. Lakewood. It wasn't on the GPS. She knew because she tried. So she followed the handwritten map she'd found in Richard's old folder. It was crude with landmarks. Only a local would know. Turn left at the rusted gas pump past the red barn with 2 mailboxes, right at the sign that says, "Dead End." But keep going. The snow started falling again, heavier now. The roads narrowed. The trees thickened. And the sense that she was going somewhere she was never meant to reach grew stronger with each mile. But she didn't turn back. She had loved a man for 30 years. She had slept beside him, made his meals, washed his clothes, kissed his forehead in sickness and in boredom. And now she was chasing his shadow into the mountains, into a lie. The cabin came into view like a secret the forest had been trying to keep. The narrow path twisted upward through pine and snow until finally the trees thinned, revealing a clearing, a wide white breadth in the dense woods. And there it stood. Weathered wooden, crouched low like it didn't want to be noticed. The roof sagged slightly on one side. A chimney puffed pale smoke into the gray sky. Martha slowed the car to a crawl. Her headlights washed over a rusted mailbox nailed to a crooked post. No name, just chipped paint and a small carved bird, a sparrow. She turned off the engine. The silence wrapped around her like a second snowfall, heavier. She sat for a full minute staring at the cabin. There were boot prints in the snow. Someone was here. She got out slowly, her boots crunching against the frozen ground. Her scarf had slipped, but she didn't bother fixing it. Each step toward the porch felt longer than it was. The wood creaked under her feet as she reached the door. She raised her hand and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder this time. Then the door cracked open. Just a few inches. A chain still hooked. A pair of wary eyes peered through the gap, sharp, suspicious, young. A girl. No, a woman, early 20s, maybe her face pale, framed by tangled dark hair pulled into a knot that was more survival than style. "What do you want?" the girl snapped. Martha blinked. I think I may have the wrong place, but if you're from the power company, I already called," the girl cut in. "I paid the damn bill." "I'm not," Martha said, steadying her voice. "I'm not here for that." The girl squinted harder. "Then what?" I'm looking for someone. This cabin, it belonged to my husband." She tried to sound confident, but the words sounded ridiculous even to herself. The girl snorted. "You sure about that?" The chain slid back. The door opened. Martha took a step forward cautiously. Inside the cabin was small and dim. A wood stove hissed in the corner. The walls were cluttered with books, hanging coats, stacks of old newspapers. It didn't feel abandoned. It felt lived in, but barely. "I'm Emily," the girl said flatly, crossing her arms. "And if this place belonged to your husband, then you better explain why the hell he never said a word to me." Martha's breath caught. Emily. The name in her husband's old letters. The signature on the transfer notices. The ghost in the photograph. I didn't know he came here," Martha admitted. Emily scoffed. "Sure you didn't." There was so much cold in the girl's tone, it made the cabin feel even smaller. "I'm sorry," Martha said, not sure why, whether for trespassing, for existing for the broken mirror of this moment. Emily walked back toward the kitchen without another word. Martha followed, hesitating only slightly. The kitchen was cluttered but functional. A kettle hissed on the stove. The sink was full of dishes. On the wall above the counter, photos were pinned, some black and white. Others' sun-faded edges curled like dried leaves. One in particular made Martha stop breathing. It was him, Richard, younger, smiling, standing outside this very cabin, one arm around a younger Emily, maybe 10 or 11, both laughing. He was holding a fishing rod. She had a sandwich in her hand. He looked free. Martha took a step closer to the photo, staring. She'd seen him smile before, but not like that. Emily saw where she was looking. "Yeah," she said. "That's him. He used to come in the summer, sometimes in fall." Martha turned slowly. "How long did you know him?" Emily shrugged, eyes suddenly distant. "Since I was 7, maybe 8. He'd show up twice a year, always with something for me. New boots, a sketchbook, candy bars. Stayed a few days, then gone again." "And your mother?" Martha asked. "She died 5 years ago. Cancer," Emily said. Her voice was flat, but her eyes weren't. "She used to say he was just a friend, but even as a kid I knew better." Martha looked back at the photo. She didn't know if she felt anger or shame or disbelief. They all came at once like waves crashing into each other. She tried to find something to hold on to. "You called him anything?" she asked softly. Emily gave a bitter laugh. "Never dared to. He wouldn't let me, said it was safer that way." Silence filled the room again. "He paid the mortgage on this place," Emily added, "through some lawyer guy, always in cash. After Mom died, the payments stopped. I've been trying to keep the lights on since." "The lawyer, of course, Robert Hale." Martha filed the name away again, tighter this time. She turned to Emily. "Do you have any idea who I am?" Emily stared at her. You said you were his wife. I was. The girl's eyes didn't soften. I didn't know about you, Martha said, her voice thinner now. Not until last week. Doesn't matter, Emily muttered. None of it changes anything. The kettle screeched behind them. Emily turned off the flame and poured hot water into 2 chipped mugs, dropping tea bags without asking. She pushed one toward Martha. They sat across from each other at the small kitchen table. The air between them buzzed with a kind of quiet tension too fresh to be bitterness, too deep to be curiosity. Martha took a sip. The tea tasted like rust and earth, but it warmed her throat. I found a postcard, she said finally, from him. It mentioned this place. Lakewood Cabin, like I promised. Emily stared at her for a long time, then nodded once. Yeah, that's what he called it, the Promise Cabin. Martha felt her heart twist at the name. Did he ever tell you anything about me? Emily shook her head. Only that he had a real life somewhere else, that he couldn't risk mixing things. Martha's lips tightened. Real life. That was what she'd been to him. Real life. Then what was this? A lie. A mistake. Or a second truth he couldn't reconcile. She looked down at the tea. Her hands trembled slightly. Can I ask you something? She said. Emily raised an eyebrow. You came all this way. Might as well. Martha leaned in just a little. Do you know who your father is? The girl stared at her. Her fingers curled around the mug, tightening slowly. Then she said, I never knew his name. Mom never said. Only called him. Said I didn't need to know. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. But I think I always did. Martha exhaled slowly. So much of her wanted to scream. It was him. It was Richard. But she couldn't. Not yet. Not here in this cramped room with ghosts in every photo and broken promises soaking the floorboards. Instead, she asked, Would you show me around the cabin? Emily hesitated, surprised by the question, but she stood up anyway. Martha followed her into the next room. There were shelves with old books, a cracked mirror above the fireplace, and a dusty guitar leaning in the corner. The walls smelled like smoke and pine. On the far end, a small bedroom unmade, cluttered with jackets and empty cans. And on the nightstand next to a broken lamp, a photo in a wooden frame, Emily and her mother, arms wrapped tight, standing on the same porch where Martha had knocked just an hour earlier. No man in sight. Do you ever wonder, Martha asked, what it would have been like if he had stayed? Emily didn't answer. She just stood there, eyes hard, arms crossed, jaw set. Martha watched her. So much of her husband lived in this girl's face. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her chin, even the way she shifted her weight, left foot slightly behind like Richard used to when he was uncomfortable. The silence was unbearable. Martha finally spoke. If I asked you to take a DNA test, would you? Emily didn't flinch. If it means I get answers? Yeah. Martha nodded slowly. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, quiet, unassuming, but relentless. They stood in that bedroom for a long moment, 2 women from 2 lives, joined by one man who was now ash in a box. Martha finally turned to leave. As she reached the door, she paused, then asked without turning, What was your mother's name? Emily's voice came from behind, soft but unwavering. Lena. And then after a beat, a harder question from Martha, one that landed like a stone. Emily. What did she tell you about your father? Emily's answer came back cold and flat. She told me he never stayed long enough for me to know. Martha closed her eyes and walked out into the snow. The next morning, Martha stood at the edge of the forest, holding her gloves in one hand and a cup of weak coffee in the other. The trees were silent, weighed down with snow. The cabin behind her creaked under the wind. Emily was sitting on the porch, knees pulled up to her chest, a threadbare blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She hadn't said much since last night. Just a few clipped words, and that final answer that rang in Martha's mind like a cold bell. She told me he never stayed long enough for me to know. Now the silence between them was quieter, less confrontational, more tired, and maybe a little curious. Martha took the first step. You said your mom died when you were 17. Emily nodded without looking up. Was it sudden? Cancer. Emily's voice was flat. She'd been sick for almost a year, but she didn't tell me until the last couple of months. Said she didn't want to ruin my youth with hospitals. Martha said nothing for a moment. That must have been hard. Emily gave a small shrug. I guess. Grief's weird. It doesn't come when you expect it. It creeps, like mold. The wind rustled the trees above them. Emily finally turned her head toward the cabin. After she passed, I stayed. I thought about leaving, but where the hell would I go? This place was all I knew. All. And your father, Martha asked softly. I told you. Never met him. Mom used to keep this old tin box under the floorboard in her bedroom. One day, about a year after the funeral, I got desperate enough to tear the place apart looking for cash. Found it. What was in it? Emily stood stretching the blanket as she walked toward the door. Come inside. I'll show you. Martha followed her. The bedroom was small, still faintly scented with lavender and old wood. Emily dropped to her knees and pulled up a warped floorboard behind the dresser. From beneath the slats, she lifted a dented tin box. It was the kind that once held cookies or Christmas candy faded blue with tiny stars around the lid. She set it on the bed and opened it slowly. Inside were several folded letters, yellowed and brittle with time. Some were typed, others handwritten. Some had return addresses. Others didn't. Emily handed Martha the top one. It was dated June 1997. Lena, I promise this time will be different. I've spoken with my attorney. The cabin will be in your name soon, and the payments will come regularly. No more hiding. I just need a little more time. Please trust me. The signature wasn't there, but the initial was. R. Martha's fingers clenched around the paper. She picked up another letter dated 3 years later. I wish I could be with you both for Christmas. It's not safe. You know that. I'm trying to protect you, not ignore you. I left something at the cabin for Emily, a sketch pad and those paints she liked. Please tell her they're from me. One day she'll understand. Martha's throat closed. She had given Richard a sketch pad for Christmas that same year. He told her he didn't want it. He said he'd forgotten how to draw. Liar. Another letter had a printed address in the corner, Hale and Carrington, LLP, Burlington, VT. Martha's stomach flipped. She turned to Emily. Do you know this name? Emily shrugged. That's the law office that handled the paperwork when Mom got sick. Some guy named Robert Hale started sending stuff through the mail, medical forms, release authorizations, whatever. He'd send money too. Not much. Just enough to pay the utility bills. I figured he was one of Mom's old friends. Martha stared at the letterhead. She knew that name. Robert Hale had been Richard's personal attorney for nearly 2 decades. They'd hosted him at Christmas dinners, shared wine, laughed about politics. He had held their will in his office safe. He'd sent flowers to Richard's funeral just last week. Her fingers curled around the letter until it crumpled. He was never her friend, Martha whispered. Emily narrowed her eyes. Then who was he? Martha didn't answer. She just turned away, gripping the edge of the dresser, trying not to collapse into her own disbelief. She felt like the floor had tilted under her. Richard hadn't just lied. He'd designed a second life, maintained it, financed it, protected it. He'd built a 2-decade architecture of deceit. And Robert Hale, the man she trusted to explain her husband's estate, to handle the death certificates, the ashes, he had known everything. Martha moved back into the kitchen. The room suddenly looked different, like the props in a stage play she had just realized she wasn't part of. On a shelf by the stove sat a slow cooker, a microwave, and a set of mismatched plates. She stared at them. Where'd those come from? She asked. Emily followed her gaze. The slow cooker. The microwave. Yes. Emily shrugged. They showed up in big brown boxes. I think the return label said something like H&C LLP. I assumed it was charity, or something Hale thought he owed us. Martha moved to the microwave. Her hand shook as she opened the small door. A note had been taped to the inside. Faded now, curled at the corners. But she could still read it. Don't forget to eat, Dad. She closed the door slowly, jaw clenched. It wasn't just betrayal. It was tenderness, directed at someone else. That was what undid her the most. She stepped back, chest heaving as her mind spun dates, letters, gifts, silence, cash, Lakewood cabin, the name Sparrow. 17, the alternate bank account. And now this girl who looked more like Richard every time she turned her head. Emily noticed the shift in her. Are you okay? She asked, cautious but not cold. Martha stared out the frosted window. I spent 30 years in a marriage where I thought I was the only one compromising. I forgave the silences, the secrets. I believed loyalty looked like patience, like sacrifice. Her voice cracked but didn't stop. I thought being the wife meant waiting. For answers. For affection. For the next chapter. I never realized I was just one book in a library he built. Emily didn't respond. She looked like she didn't know how to. Martha let out a bitter laugh. I used to think the worst thing that could happen in grief was discovering you didn't say goodbye properly. Turns out it's discovering the person you buried wasn't who you thought they were. She walked back into the bedroom and picked up the rest of the letters. Flipping through them now, she noticed something she'd missed before. Most of the letters were grouped in 3s or 4s with gaps in between. Long gaps. Years where nothing came. Then bursts of promises. It was like he had returned to them in seasons. Maybe guilt had a cycle just like grief. At the bottom of the tin box was a photograph barely visible beneath the paper. Martha pulled it free. It was a picture of Lena Emily's mother holding a toddler by the hand on a narrow dock. Her eyes were bright. She looked nothing like the other women Martha had known. There was a stillness in her, a kind of tired wisdom. Behind them stood Richard, further back, smiling but distant. He wasn't in the moment. He was observing it, curating it, creating a scene he could return to without ever really being there. Martha folded the photo and slid it into her coat pocket. As she stood at the threshold ready to leave, Emily asked, "Are you going to tell me who he was?" Martha met her eyes. The girl had a right to know. But Martha couldn't say it yet. The truth needed time. She needed time. "I'm not sure what's true yet," she said, "but I intend to find out." Emily nodded, but there was pain in her posture, hurt long buried flaring again. "He made us both wait," she said, "and now he's gone." Martha looked around the cabin one last time. The kettle, the notes, the ghost of a man who'd carved 2 lives and disappeared into ashes. She looked back at Emily and said very quietly, "No, he's not gone. Not yet." Then she stepped out into the snow, the wind biting at her cheeks. Behind her, the door closed. But nothing about this was finished. The silence inside the car was sharp. Martha had parked halfway down the long gravel path leading away from the cabin. The engine idled, the heater hummed low, and her gloved hands gripped the steering wheel. She glanced at the passenger seat where her coat lay folded neatly. No Emily. She'd offered, gently, earnestly, even awkwardly. "You should come back with me," Martha had said an hour earlier, standing at the edge of the porch, her boots buried in snow. Just for a night. Warm bed, real food maybe. Talk more. But Emily had crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes like someone watching a trap snap shut. "Why?" she asked. "So you can figure out what I'm worth in all this." "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" "You show up here out of nowhere and you expect me to believe you're just curious, that you're not here to clean up whatever mess your husband left behind." Martha had hesitated, because the truth was she didn't know what she was here for anymore. Guilt, justice, control, closure. None of it felt right. None of it felt enough. "Emily," she said softer now, "I didn't know about you. That's the truth. I was just as blind as you were." Emily's expression barely moved. "This cabin is all I have left," she said, "and I'm not giving it up, not to you, not to anyone." Then she walked back inside and closed the door without a sound. Now Martha sat in the car staring into the trees, the girl's words still echoing in her chest. "This cabin is all I have left." That sentence hurt more than it should have. She put the car in drive and slowly rolled down the path, tires crunching over ice, heart pounding with something between shame and rage. She didn't head home. She drove straight to Haven Ridge, back to the one place where Richard had left his fingerprints outside her sight, the bank. The sky above was gray and collapsing. Fat snowflakes swirled against her windshield as she pulled into the private lot of Snow River Private Banking. She slammed the car door shut behind her and marched inside. The same receptionist sat at the front desk, her eyes widening slightly when she saw Martha. "Mrs. Aldridge, I'm here to speak to your supervisor," Martha said without pause. "Today. Now. I'll see if Mr. Keeler is available." "He will be," Martha cut in. "Unless you'd like to explain to federal investigators why a widow is being stonewalled over a fraudulent financial account tied to her deceased husband." The woman blinked, hands suddenly still on her keyboard. She didn't argue. Within 2 minutes, Keeler appeared again, looking more cautious than smug this time. "Mrs. Aldridge," he said, hands folded in front of him like a shield. "Let's step into my office." She followed him down a corridor lined with soundproof glass offices and steel-framed artwork. The door clicked shut behind them. Keeler gestured to a leather chair. Martha remained standing. "I want the account history for Sparrow 17, she said. He gave a tired sigh. "As I said before, without appropriate authorization or power of attorney, I can't release privileged. Then explain to me why a transfer is being initiated from that account, she interrupted, and why the name listed as beneficiary is Emily. His eyes froze for a moment. Then he exhaled slowly, sat down, clicked his mouse. I'm not supposed to show you this. I'm not supposed to be burying two versions of my husband, she snapped. So here we are. He clicked a few more times, then turned the monitor gently in her direction. It was all there. The screen showed a clean, minimal interface. Account Sparrow 17. Balance $2.1 million. Status transfer pending. Under beneficiary Emily Carson. Martha stared at the name. Carson. Not Aldridge. Not Hale. Just Carson. No history, no claim. Who initiated this, she asked. Keeler hesitated. It was filed a few days before Mr. Aldridge's death, executed through a power of attorney on file. Martha looked at him sharply. What attorney? He swallowed, clicked again. A digital document opened. She could see the heading immediately. Power of attorney authorization. Client Sparrow 17. At the bottom of the form was a signature. Clear, confident, familiar. Robert Hale. The air left her lungs. Hale, she said aloud. Robert Hale is the signing authority. Keeler nodded slowly, uncertain. He's been working with Mr. Aldridge for years, he said, cautious now. He presented identification. Verified on all security layers. The bank accepted his authorization for the transfer. Martha's head was spinning. She pointed at the screen. So let me get this straight. Hale initiated this transfer. On behalf of Richard. Without notifying me. Without telling Emily. Just moved to sign over $2 million to a girl who doesn't even know she's named in it. I can't speculate on the internal motivations, Keeler said carefully. All I can say is the process followed institutional protocol. Martha leaned forward, her voice hard now. Did it follow protocol to hide this account from me? Did it follow protocol to ignore the fact that Richard died before the transfer cleared? Keeler sat back, said nothing. Martha stepped away from the desk, pacing now. Her thoughts raced. Halo. Of course it was him. He knew about Emily. About the cabin. He was the bridge between Richard's two worlds. The handler. The cleaner. She pictured him calm and charming in his gray suits, drinking red wine at their dinner table, talking about mutual funds and estate planning, while silently funneling money toward a second life her husband didn't have the spine to claim publicly. Martha turned back to Keeler. I want a full printout, she said. All transactions tied to Sparrow 17. I want dates, amounts, recipients, and I want it now. I can't authorize. You'll authorize it, she said, or I'll be outside this building in 30 minutes with a news van and a subpoena request. He paused. His fingers tapped nervously against the desk. Finally, he said, give me 10 minutes. She didn't thank him. She just stepped out into the hallway and waited. 10 minutes later, she left the bank with a sealed folder under her arm and her heartbeat in her throat. She didn't go home. She didn't go back to the cabin. She drove to the edge of town and pulled into a diner she barely remembered from earlier visits. It was nearly empty. A man in a trucker hat sat at the far end of the counter nursing soup. She slid into a booth and opened the folder. Pages and pages of data stared back at her. It was all there. Dates that coincided with Richard's fishing trips. Amounts that matched credit card payments she couldn't explain. Cash withdrawals from ATMs near the cabin. Transfers to utility companies under different names. Shipments from appliance stores. Medical invoices, school donations, groceries. He hadn't just been showing up twice a year. He'd been providing. Not consistently, not responsibly, but actively, secretly. And Robert Hale had been facilitating every step. There were even emails attached, summarized logs between Hale and an unnamed recipient tagged only L.C. Lena Carson. Her throat tightened again. Martha flipped the last page and stared at the final form. Transfer date. Pending. To beneficiary. Emily Carson. Signed by Robert Hale. Acting guardian. Note. Transfer to execute upon confirmation of recipient's identity. Acting guardian. Of what? Who had given him that right? And why was he still involved now after Richard was gone? She sat there for a long time, the folder open, snow melting from her boots onto the red vinyl floor. Her hands didn't shake this time. They burned. Emily had been wrong. Martha wasn't here to take the cabin. She wasn't here to protect Richard's secrets. She was here to burn the whole rotten scaffolding down, starting with Robert Hale. The door to Robert Hale's office still smelled like polish and quiet money. It was the same door Martha had passed through dozens of times over the years, back when it was just estate planning. Minor legal questions, the kind of routine things a couple nearing retirement would quietly prepare for. Back when she thought she knew the man who slept beside her. Now she was walking through it with a folder in her hand that felt like a lit fuse. Robert looked up as she entered. Same gray suit, same perfectly parted hair, same expression that lived somewhere between concern and mild condescension. He stood quickly gesturing like a politician who didn't know what scandal had hit him yet. "Martha," he said warmly, "you should have called ahead. I figured showing up would save time." He nodded toward the chair across from his desk. "Please sit." She didn't. He waited a beat, then lowered himself into his seat, adjusting his cufflinks. "I heard about Richard. I'm sorry. I was going to stop by after the service, but I don't care." He blinked. Excuse me. I don't care about pleasantries, Robert. I came for answers, and you're going to give them to me." The warmth drained from his face. He leaned back slightly, adopting a more cautious posture. "What exactly are you referring to?" She threw the folder onto his desk. He opened it, flipping through the documents quickly. Martha watched his jaw tense as he reached the last page. "I spoke to Snow River Bank," she said. "Saw the transfer order, saw your signature." Robert nodded once, slowly. "I acted within legal authority." "I didn't ask you that," Martha cut in. "What I want to know is why you're signing off on $2 million being sent to a girl who didn't even know it existed. Why you're calling yourself her guardian. Why you've been the middleman in a lie my husband built for over 2 decades. Robert looked at her, no longer smiling. "He came to me," he said calmly. "He wanted to make it right." "You think he didn't feel guilty?" "Of course he did. That's what this was, setting things straight before it was too late." Martha narrowed her eyes. "So why didn't he tell me?" "Because he didn't want to lose you too." She stared at him. "You're painting him like a man who made a noble mistake," she said. "But what he did was not a mistake. It was a life, a second family, and you helped him hide it." Robert folded his hands. "It's not that simple." "No, Robert, it really is." He let out a soft sigh, almost a performance. "Look, there were arrangements. He wanted to protect everyone. He asked me to keep the accounts active, make sure the girl Emily had support after her mother died. He didn't think you'd understand." "I understand betrayal just fine." Robert's mouth twisted slightly. "You're grieving. I know this is a lot. You don't know anything about what I'm feeling." Martha said, her voice suddenly low and dark. "You think this is about grief. This is about discovering I was the footnote in my husband's life. And you, someone I trusted, helped write the damn margins." He tapped a pen nervously against his desk. "Everything I did was within the boundaries of law." "Then you won't mind showing me the original documents," she said. He froze. "I want the originals, Robert. Not scans, not copies. The originals, every authorization, every bank form, every letter Richard gave you. If this was all above board, that shouldn't be a problem." He hesitated. "They're protected, legally privileged." Martha gave a cold laugh. "Of course they are. It's not personal." "No," she said, stepping forward, voice rising. "It's precisely personal. You're hiding behind law to protect a dead man's secrets. And you're forgetting I'm not some stranger. I am his widow. I buried him. I cleaned out the drawers he left behind. I found his photo in another woman's house. I've met the daughter he never told me existed. And now I'm supposed to play dumb while you shuffle money through closed doors." Robert didn't flinch, but she saw his jaw tighten. "I'm telling you, Martha," he said quietly, "you don't want to dig into this." "Wrong again," she whispered. "It's the only thing I want." Her phone buzzed in her coat pocket. She stepped back, pulled it out, answered without checking the screen. Emily's voice came through tight with panic. "Martha, someone's been in the cabin." Martha's blood ran cold. "What?" "The front door was open when I came back from town. The lock's busted. Everything's been rifled through drawers, closets, even the floorboard under Mom's bed. They knew what they were looking for." Martha turned her back to Robert, voice steady. "Did they take anything?" "I don't know yet, but the tin box is missing." Martha closed her eyes. "Get out of there," she said. "Go stay somewhere else tonight. I'm coming back." "Okay," Emily whispered. "Be careful." Martha ended the call and turned slowly back toward Robert. He was standing now. "What was that about?" he asked carefully. "You tell me," she said. "Because someone just tore through that cabin like they were looking for every document that could connect you to all of this. I had nothing to do with that." Then you have nothing to worry about, she said. Right. His face gave nothing away. Martha walked to the door. I'm not done, Robert, she said, not even close. She left without looking back. The sun was low by the time she reached the cabin again. Emily was sitting on the steps, arms crossed, jaw clenched, shotgun resting across her lap. Martha stepped out of the car slowly. No cops, Emily said immediately. I don't trust them. Not out here. They'll take a report and forget we exist. Martha nodded. Did you see anyone? No. But whoever it was, they knew where to look. They didn't touch the electronics, didn't steal food, just papers, letters, photos. They stepped inside. The place had been ransacked, but methodically. The floorboard behind the dresser was pulled up. Books were open, not scattered, files dumped, not destroyed, not. They weren't there to destroy, Martha said. They were there to remove. Emily dropped into a chair. That box had everything. The letters, my mom's prescriptions, the deed. Martha's eyes swept the room, then landed on something, a faint scrape mark on the wall near the stove. She walked over, pushed aside the wood panel. Behind it was a hollowed-out space, shallow, maybe a foot deep. Inside was a wooden box, not the tin one. This one was dark carved, almost ceremonial. She pulled it free, dusted it off, opened it. Inside were documents, neatly stacked, tagged with yellow stickies in Richard's handwriting, bank receipts, signed letters, and a thin manila envelope labeled Authorization, RH. She opened it. Inside a copy of the power of attorney form Robert Hale had signed. The signature was the same one from the bank's digital record, but here on this copy it was dated 2 months after Richard's official time of death. Martha blinked, looked again. The document had been backdated, or worse, forged after the fact. She sat down hard, the weight of it pressing down like lead. Emily leaned over. What is it? It's the match, Martha whispered. It's the match that could burn Hale down. She looked up at the girl, the woman sitting across from her, eyes burning with equal parts fear and defiance. We can't go to the police, not yet, not without more. So what do? Martha took a long breath. We dig. Emily blinked. Together. Martha nodded. For all of it, for your mother, for the lies, for the money, for the goddamn truth. And in that moment they weren't widow and orphan. They were something else. Allies. Emily slammed the folder shut, the sound echoing sharply through the small cabin like a slap. Guardian, she snapped. What the hell does that even mean? I never authorized anyone to represent me. I don't even know how to spell power of attorney, let alone sign one. She was pacing now, hands clenched into fists at her sides, eyes lit with fury that had clearly been simmering for years, just waiting for a name to attach to all the silence she'd endured. And now it had one Robert Hale. Martha sat at the table, the forged document still lying open in front of her. She'd memorized every line, every signature, every incorrect date. It was no longer just betrayal. It was a crime. Emily rounded on her. You knew him. You sat across from him for years. How the hell could he look you in the eye and lie like that? Martha didn't answer right away. She didn't know how to. Robert had been at her wedding anniversary parties. He'd toasted Richard's retirement with bourbon and anecdotes. He'd sent flowers to her mother's funeral. And all the while he'd been orchestrating the most precise, intimate theft imaginable. Not just money, but history, identity, inheritance, blood. I don't know, Martha said finally, but I'm going to find out. Emily exhaled hard, gripping the edge of the table. He has all the paperwork, the signatures, the dates. I have nothing, no degree, no lawyer, no title. You have the truth, Martha said, and that's more dangerous than you think. 2 days later, they sat across from a man in a plaid shirt and a Red Sox hat in a rundown breakfast joint outside Haven Ridge. His name was Gerald Mason, and he had once managed mid-tier client accounts at Snow River Bank before retiring 5 years ago, after what the staff had called an internal restructuring. Martha had found his name on an old holiday card from the bank in one of Richard's folders. You're looking into Sparrow 17, Gerald asked, lowering his coffee cup. That account gave me migraines for years. Martha leaned in. Because it was private, he said. Too private. Only a few of us even knew it existed. Set up under a special code. No paper mail. All internal digital tracking. Most of the transfers were manually approved. By Robert Hale, Martha said. Gerald's lips tightened. Among others. But yes, Hale had high-level clearance. He filed for limited access authorization about 10 years ago. Said it was a request from the client. The client was my husband, Martha said. Gerald paused, then nodded once. I thought so. I only met him once. Briefly. Sharp suit. Quiet. Knew exactly what to say and when to say nothing. Martha reached into her bag and pulled out a printout of the forged authorization letter. Gerald took it, scanned it. Something wrong? Emily asked. He held up the signature page. This signature, he said, doesn't match the one I verified in 2017. You verified it? Martha asked. Yep. Sparrow 17 had to reauthorize transfer capabilities after a firewall breach. I personally witnessed the client sign off on the new documents. I still have the archived form at home. I recognized the way he curled his R, always curved upward. He held up the page again. This one dips downward. It's not the same hand. Emily's eyes widened. So it's forged. I'd bet my pension on it. Martha felt something inside her body realign. Not peace, not yet, but momentum, a direction. Can we get a copy of the original? She asked. Gerald nodded. Give me a day. I'll have to dig through boxes, but if it's where I think it is, I'll find it. Martha placed a hand over his. You're saving someone's life, she said, even if she didn't know it was being stolen. Gerald looked at Emily, then nodded, eyes softer now. I'll be in touch. That night, back in the cabin, Emily lit a fire. She'd been quiet since the diner, walking with slower steps, speaking in fewer words. Martha handed her a cup of tea and sat across from her. You okay? Emily stared into the flames. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. There's no supposed to. She turned, eyes raw. He didn't even give me a chance. My whole life I thought I was the mistake, the one left behind. And now I find out I was part of a plan, a file, a secret being passed around between men in suits. Martha didn't interrupt. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. And now that he's gone, all I've got is paperwork. And a forged name. No, Martha said gently. Now you've got proof, and we're going to use it. Emily looked at her. Use it how? Martha stood, walked to her purse, pulled out a small black object and placed it on the table. A voice recorder. Emily blinked. You're serious? He's arrogant, Martha said. That makes him sloppy. I'm going back to him. One more time. I'll press him, push him, and he'll do what men like him always do when they feel untouchable. Slip. Martha nodded, just enough. Emily looked at the recorder like it was a loaded weapon. You've done this before. No, Martha said. But I've kept my mouth shut long enough. I think I'll be good at speaking up. The next afternoon, Robert Hale looked up from his desk and didn't bother hiding his irritation. Martha, he said, back so soon. She smiled politely. The recorder hidden in her coat pocket had been running since she left the car. I just wanted to give you a chance, she said, to tell the truth before I take this public. He leaned back. There's nothing to tell. You forged my husband's signature, she said. You filed a power of attorney dated after his death. That's a felony. His nostrils flared. Those are serious accusations. I've got a former bank manager who can confirm the mismatch. I've got transaction dates that don't add up. I have a girl who never authorized you to act on her behalf. Robert's face changed just a flicker, but enough. The corner of his lip tightened. His hand stilled. You don't understand how this works, he said finally. Then explain it to me. He stood now. This wasn't fraud. It was cleanup. Your husband left a mess. He wanted Emily provided for. He didn't have the guts to tell you, so I made it happen. By stealing. By making sure the money went where it was meant to go, he snapped. Martha didn't blink. There it was, right there. He heard it too, realized it an instant too late. Her hand was already in her coat, clicking off the recorder. Robert froze. What did you just do? Martha smiled. Something I should have done years ago. She left before he could answer. Back at the cabin, she handed the recorder to Emily. I have everything I need, she said. We have him. If we go to the press, the bank, the bar association, it all falls apart. Emily turned the recorder over in her hand. You think they'll believe us? They'll believe the signatures, the recordings, the timeline. And what if they don't? Martha's voice didn't waver. Then we make them. Emily was quiet a long moment. Then she said, what about you? What about your name? Your husband's reputation? Martha laughed, but there was no humor in it. My name was his shield for 30 years. I think it's time I used it as a sword. She stood, walked to the fireplace, tossed the last forged paper into the flames and watched it curl. Then she turned to Emily. We're going to court. The article hit the front page of the Haven Ridge Gazette on a rainy Thursday morning. Local lawyer implicated in multi-year estate fraud, secret account forged documents, illegitimate transfer to unknown heir. The print was bold, aggressive. The subheading listed Robert Hale's name in full. Beneath that, Martha's name appeared, once followed by a brief sanitized reference to her late husband's undisclosed financial arrangements. But the part that stopped Emily cold was the final line of the second paragraph. Transfer intended for alleged illegitimate child Emily Carson, whose claim remains under investigation. Emily stared at it in the cabin's dim morning light, hands shaking. The paper trembled in her lap like a living thing. Martha stood behind her at the stove, pouring water into the old percolator. The aroma of fresh coffee did nothing to soften the room's sharp edges. Emily said nothing for a long time. Then he called me alleged. Martha didn't respond right away. And illegitimate, Emily added, her voice cracking. She folded the newspaper not because she was finished reading it, but because if she looked at it 1 second longer, she might scream. He's trying to erase me, Emily said, staring down. Not just legally, as a person. Martha turned and sat across from her. He's losing control, she said. This is how men like Robert react when the narrative slips. They smear. He said I was part of some plot, that my mom manipulated a vulnerable man for financial gain. Martha nodded slowly. I read the press release. Emily's laugh was hollow. Of course you did. I also read between the lines. Emily's eyes lifted. How do you stay calm after everything? I'm not calm, Martha said. I'm just practiced. She sipped her coffee, then added, almost like a confession. The first time Richard asked me to skip an art show so he could take a business trip, I said yes. Then I said yes again and again, until it became a habit, until I forgot I was allowed to say no. Emily didn't speak. Martha looked at her, voice gentle but firm. You're not a mistake, Emily. He may have left you behind, but you are not less. Don't let a desperate man rewrite the truth you already lived. Emily's jaw clenched. It's not just him. It's the comments online. People speculating about my mom, saying she probably seduced a married man, that I'm some grifter trying to cash in on a scandal. They don't know you. They don't want to. It's easier to believe I'm lying than believe their trusted family lawyer is a fraud. Martha leaned in. That's exactly what Robert is counting on. Public fatigue, apathy. We're not going to let him have it. The fire in Emily's eyes returned slightly, but it returned. She sat up straighter. So what now? Martha pulled a manila envelope from the satchel beside her chair. We file. They submitted the complaint the next morning. It was handwritten, typed, then reviewed by a pro bono legal advocate from a neighboring county who'd seen the newspaper article and reached out privately. He didn't promise victory, he promised process. The complaint was clean, direct fraud, unauthorized power of attorney, posthumous document tampering, unlawful transfer of estate assets. Attached were the voice recording, Gerald Mason's testimony, and the signature analysis. 3 days later, the county court issued a preliminary acceptance. An investigation would begin. A hearing would be scheduled. And most significantly, the financial account tied to Sparrow 17 would be frozen indefinitely pending resolution. Martha got the call just before dawn. When she hung up, she walked into Emily's room, where the girl had fallen asleep fully clothed on top of the covers. Exhaustion having finally won out over anxiety. She sat beside her and rested a hand on her shoulder. Emily stirred, half dreaming. What? It's happening, Martha said. They're freezing the account. Emily blinked up at her. Are we winning? Martha gave the faintest smile. We're not losing anymore. That night, Emily stood outside, hands in her coat pockets, staring up at the black Vermont sky. The stars were smeared across the darkness like chalk on a blackboard just slightly out of reach. Martha stepped out beside her. You know, Emily said, when I was younger, I used to believe if I stared long enough, something would answer back. Maybe my mom, maybe God, maybe just a voice. Martha looked up, letting the stillness settle over her shoulders. And now she asked. Emily gave a short breath. Now I'm just glad I'm not staring into it alone. They stood in silence for a long time, breathing in the cold. And then Emily said without turning, You didn't have to stay. I know, but you did. I owed myself that much. Emily finally turned to her. I'm glad it was you. Who found the letter? Who came here? Martha nodded. Me too. Inside the cabin, the fire flickered the newspaper, now crumpled in the bin, the narrative slowly shifting back into their hands. Outside, 2 women stood shoulder to shoulder, one carrying a past too quiet for too long. the other carrying a legacy she never asked for, and for the first time both facing the same direction. Forward. The cabin felt different now. Not safer, not quieter, but claimed. Martha stood at the edge of the living room, sleeves rolled up, sorting through a dusty box of linens Emily had found in the crawl space. She sneezed into her shoulder and laughed softly. I swear this blanket remembers the Cold War. Emily was kneeling in the corner, pulling up the bottom drawer of an old chest she hadn't touched since she was a teenager. Her hair was pinned back, eyes focused. The air smelled like lemon oil and firewood. The floor was scattered with old receipts, bottle caps, thumbtacks, and pens that no longer worked. "Hey," Emily said suddenly, "help me lift this." Martha crossed over. Together they pulled the drawer entirely out of the frame and set it aside. What lay beneath it wasn't much, just a shallow space warped and lined with dust, and a canvas. It had been laid flat, covered in brown butcher paper held together with yellowed tape. Emily unwrapped it slowly. The colors hit first faded, earthy tones. Gray-blue for sky, raw sienna sand, deep emerald water. A shoreline twisted slightly left as if viewed from behind. In the center stood a lone figure, a woman in a long coat, silver hair blown sideways in the wind. Her back to the viewer. Unfinished. Her face was never painted. Her hands were empty. The brushstrokes stopped mid-hip as if Lena's time had run out just before she could give the woman an identity. Emily stared. Martha did too. Her fingers moved toward the canvas, barely touching the edges. "I remember this," Emily whispered. "She worked on it for years. Started it before I was born. Said she never quite figured out what the woman was looking at." "She's not looking away," Martha murmured. "She's walking into something." Emily's voice dropped. She always said this was a painting for someone she'd never met. Martha sat down slowly on the edge of the coffee table. Because the shape of the woman, the shoulders, the posture, the curve of her coat was unmistakable. It was her. She didn't know how or why, but it was her. She'd never met Lena Carson, never even heard her name until weeks ago. But somehow this woman, this stranger, had painted her as if she were destiny, and she'd left it for Emily. For them. The courthouse in Burlington was built of gray brick and stiff traditions. The hearing wasn't dramatic, no jury, no gavels slamming, but it was real, and that mattered. The courtroom buzzed with the nervous energy of attorneys who knew they were part of something larger than a mere dispute over signatures. The press was in the back pens, ready, cameras tucked discreetly. Robert Hale stood at the defense table in his usual charcoal suit, but the confidence that once wrapped around him like silk now hung loose. Martha sat beside Emily in the front row. Their new attorney, the one who had taken the case pro bono, stood to speak. He began methodically. Evidence of forged documents. Timeline inconsistencies. Richard's death certificate versus the dates of the transfer forms. Then, like a slow-moving wreck, the prosecution called their first key witness, Gerald Mason. He walked in with a slight limp, wearing a tan corduroy jacket and a scowl that belonged more in a poker room than a courtroom. He was sworn in, and then he spoke. He detailed how he'd overseen Richard's original signature on a 2017 transfer document, how he'd archived the file, how the handwriting analysis Martha had ordered confirmed the current signature was inconsistent. And then he dropped the hammer. He pulled out a folder and handed it to the clerk. It contained the original signature form from the archive, stamped and dated properly. The judge flipped through it, then compared it side by side with the transfer form Robert had submitted. Silence thickened. Robert's lawyer cleared his throat. "My client had no knowledge." The judge held up a hand. "I've seen enough for a preliminary ruling," he said. Then he turned to Robert. "Mr. Hale, do you have an explanation for the discrepancy in these documents?" Robert stood. His eyes were colder now, calculating. "I was told the documents were in place," he said. "I processed what was handed to me by the decedent prior to his passing. That's not what the dates show. I may have been misinformed. Forging a signature is not a clerical error," the judge snapped. Robert opened his mouth but didn't speak. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. The judge turned to the bailiff. "Mr. Hale is to be remanded to custody pending further investigation for suspected fraud, forgery, and abuse of fiduciary responsibility." Murmurs broke out behind them. A camera clicked. Robert's jaw clenched, but his face remained blank as the bailiff stepped beside him. He didn't resist, just lowered his eyes as the cuffs slid around his wrists. Emily's breath caught. Martha reached over and took her hand. Robert was led out the side door flanked by officers. Martha could feel Emily trembling beside her, but the girl's grip was solid. It was over, at least the part where no one believed them. That evening, back at the cabin, the sky cracked open with a soft rain that turned the snow to slush. Martha lit the fire. Emily sat with the canvas on her lap. She stared at it the way someone stares at a mirror for too long, unsure if they're still seeing themselves. Martha poured 2 mugs of tea and sat beside her. "She started this before I was born," Emily said again. She must have known, Martha whispered. Known what? That one day it had reached the person it was meant for. Emily looked at her. "You really think this woman is you?" Martha smiled, tired but sure. "I think she knew there was someone out there who'd walk into the storm instead of away from it. Someone she never met. Someone who might not show up until long after the painting stopped." Emily nodded quiet for a long time. Then she said, "She always said people aren't born brave. They become brave when they run out of other options." Sounds familiar. They clinked their mugs together without saying anything else. Outside, the rain turned to snow again, quiet and slow. Inside, the unfinished painting leaned against the fireplace, still incomplete, still waiting, but no longer unseen. The cabin smelled like cedar and closure. They sat at the kitchen table, papers spread out between them, official ones this time, legal ones, signed, notarized, processed. The court had ruled in their favor. Robert Hale's assets were frozen. His license had been suspended. And Richard's estate, every unspent dollar in the Sparrow 17 account, was now under Martha's legal control. The account balance had settled at $2.1 million, along with the deed to the cabin and a modest plot of land nearby that had quietly appreciated in value. Emily stared at the stack of documents like it was radioactive. "It's yours now," Martha said. "The court made it official this morning." Emily didn't speak. Martha studied her. "Say something." Emily looked up. "I don't want it." Martha blinked. "What?" "I don't want the money, not like this." "You fought for this," Martha said, measured. "You risked everything." "I fought for the truth," Emily replied. "For my mother, for myself. But I don't want his guilt, not packaged in a checkbook." Martha leaned back in her chair. "Emily, this isn't about guilt. This is what he should have given you when he was alive." Emily's jaw tightened. He didn't. And now he's dead. And everything that money touched feels poisoned. Martha looked at the papers again, so tidy, so sterile. Emily's voice cracked. "I don't want to be the legacy of his lies." Martha nodded slowly. "Then don't be. Be something else. Take it. Give it away. Build something different with it. Rewrite what it means." Emily was silent. Martha stood, walked to the stove, poured tea into 2 chipped mugs, and set one in front of the girl. "You think if you give it back, it'll erase everything," she said gently. "It won't. It'll just pass into someone else's hands. Maybe the state. Maybe some legal tangle that'll bleed it dry in court." Emily looked down at the tea. "I've lived without money," she said. "I know what that feels like. But at least it was mine. My struggle. My decisions." Martha stepped closer. "Then make this yours too," she said. "Not his, not mine, just yours." Emily hesitated, and then shook her head. "I want the cabin. That's it. Just the cabin. That's all that ever felt like home." Martha stared at her. Then slowly she nodded. That evening, while Emily chopped wood out back, Martha sat at the kitchen table writing. The paper was thick, cream-colored, pulled from an old stationery box she'd found tucked in one of the cabin drawers. The pen was heavy in her hand. Words came slowly, but they came. She paused once halfway through and looked out the window. Emily was stacking logs now, her breath visible in the chill, her body moving with rhythm and purpose. Her mother's old scarf was wrapped around her neck, her boots were muddy, her hair a tangle of rebellion and grace. Martha smiled, then kept writing. When she finished, she folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope, and wrote one word on the front, Emily. She didn't say goodbye that night. She didn't announce anything. She packed quietly. A single duffel. The unfinished painting wrapped in a wool blanket. Her journal. A copy of the court documents. And the smallest photograph of Richard she could find, one where his face was turned away, caught in profile, barely there. She left the letter on the kitchen table, and before the sun rose, she slipped out the door. Emily found the letter the next morning. The cabin was cold. The fire had gone out. She lit the stove, made coffee, then saw the envelope lying beside the tea kettle. She stared at it for a long time before opening it. Martha's handwriting was careful, unrushed. Dear Emily, there are some goodbyes that don't need to be spoken aloud. This is one of them. You gave me something I didn't know I needed, a reason to remember who I was before marriage, before duty, before the silence that stretched between Richard and me like a frozen lake. I used to think closure was about understanding the people who hurt us. I was wrong. Closure is giving ourselves permission to move forward, even when no one else does. You're not the daughter I raised, but you are the daughter I've come to love. You are the brushstroke I never dared to make, the painting I never thought would find me. I've left the assets in your name, all of them. Do with them what feels right. I trust you'll know how to turn ash into something worth holding. I've gone to the sea, to Oregon. There's a small town with a gallery and an empty wall waiting. I plan to fill it. Thank you for walking into the storm with me. Love, Martha. Emily folded the letter carefully. Then she leaned forward, rested her head on the table, and cried. Not because she was left behind again, but because for the first time she knew she wasn't alone. The train pulled into Astoria, Oregon, under a curtain of salt-laced fog. Martha stepped down onto the platform wearing a long coat, a knit scarf, and that quiet steadiness that comes from having nothing left to lose. She carried the duffel over one shoulder and the painting under her arm. Her boots struck the concrete with soft finality. A young woman at the station desk pointed her toward a coastal inn near the bluff. Just follow the sound of the gulls, she said with a smile, and Martha did. She walked through the gray morning past weathered storefronts and art galleries with windows fogged from the inside. A breeze lifted her scarf. She didn't pull it tighter. Everything about this place felt like the inhale before something new. She reached the inn, checked in under her maiden name, took the corner room with the ocean view. That night she hung the painting in the corner, still unfinished, still hers, but not forgotten. And the next morning, with the fog pulling back from the water, she opened her sketchbook for the first time in decades and began to draw again, not Richard, not grief, not even Emily, but herself, face forward, eyes open, alive. The gallery sat 2 blocks from the edge of the Pacific. It wasn't grand, just a repurposed bait shop with wood-beam ceilings and walls now scrubbed clean of salt and memory. But on this spring afternoon, it was alive with voices, with breath, with movement. People clustered in front of canvases, wine in hand, murmuring over shapes and shadows and brushstrokes. Outside, the Oregon wind whipped against the windows. Inside, it was warm with something else recognition. Martha stood near the back by a table of cheap wine and handwritten name tags. She wore a linen jacket, simple earrings, and her hair pinned up in a way she hadn't bothered with in decades. Around her, people moved slowly, thoughtfully, stopping at each frame with the kind of silence artists dream of, the silence that means someone is feeling something they can't name. A placard on the wall read, "Fragments of Silence, a collection by Martha Aldridge." Below it, dedicated to those who walked through the quiet and dared to speak. The paintings were hers entirely, utterly hers. Faces without eyes, windows that looked inward, a field full of shoes, all missing their left match. A woman lying on the floor of a kitchen reaching for a hummingbird just out of frame, each one torn from her, every piece a memory she never voiced until now. But it was the last painting that drew the crowd. Hung on the far wall, lit by a single overhead bulb, it showed a woman standing on the edge of a cliff, her back to the viewer. Silver hair pulled in the wind, one arm extended behind her. Her hand clasped the hand of a younger woman, head bowed, pressed into the older woman's shoulder. They weren't walking forward. They weren't standing still. They were becoming. Martha stood apart from the crowd, watching strangers take in a version of her she had never dared to show. Then she heard it, a breath, soft, familiar. She turned, and there stood Emily, older somehow in just a year. Her face leaner, her clothes simpler. But the same fire in her eyes, just better harnessed now. She held something under her arm wrapped in cloth. Her boots were wet, her cheeks flushed from wind. Martha couldn't speak. Emily didn't either, not at first. Then she stepped forward. "You forgot one," she said. She unwrapped the canvas. It was the unfinished painting, Lena's painting. The beach, the silver-haired woman, the absence. Emily held it like an offering, Martha took it slowly. Her fingers brushed the edges, her breath hitched. I didn't know where else it should go, Emily said. Martha set the painting on the table beside her, looked up. Emily's voice dropped. I thought maybe you could finish it. Martha took a breath. Then she pulled her in. The hug wasn't dramatic. There were no gasps or sobs or violin swells, but it was the kind of embrace that rewrote time, that folded two stories together into a single binding thread. They stood that way for a long moment, surrounded by strangers who for once knew not to interrupt. When they pulled apart, Martha brushed a hair from Emily's cheek. I wasn't sure you'd come. I wasn't either, Emily said. But something told me you'd saved me a seat. Martha smiled, always. That night, long after the gallery had emptied and the last bottle of wine had been corked, Martha sat alone in the studio space behind the main room. The painting stood on an easel, Lena's painting, still unfinished, still waiting. Emily had gone to check in at the inn. She said she'd be back in the morning. No rush, no expectations, just presence. Martha picked up a brush. She held it in her hand like a question. Then she dipped it in the ocean blue. She began with the horizon, soft, not rigid. Then the curve of the younger woman's shoulder. Then the hand. Then the woman beside her. She didn't try to match Lena's style. She didn't try to imitate. She just continued. She painted silver hair and then wrinkles. Not just soft ones, but deep ones. Years of weather and survival. She painted a hand reaching not out but back, gently, firmly anchoring the younger woman in place. And then in the sky above them she painted something faint, the outline of a sparrow. Small, in motion, head turned mid-flight. By the time she put the brush down, the sky was beginning to lighten. In the weeks that followed, the story spread farther than anyone expected. Robert Hale had been sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, forgery, and abuse of fiduciary responsibility. His trial transcripts were public. His face, once tied to respectable billboards and charity golf tournaments, was now a lesson in the danger of unchecked power behind polished smiles. But the media's attention shifted quickly, as it always does. What remained was smaller, quieter, and far more important. Emily stayed in Oregon for a few months. She took a job at a local community arts center teaching kids how to paint grief without naming it. She kept the cabin in Vermont, rented it out to women coming out of shelters who needed a place to start over. She never touched the money. She created something with it instead. Martha kept painting, not for galleries, not for anyone else, just to remember the silence and how good it felt to finally speak. One night, months later, the two of them stood on the same beach Martha had dreamed of for years. The wind pulled at their jackets, the tide crept in slow. Emily pointed toward the horizon. That one's mine. Martha followed her finger. A small white gull soared low and quiet across the waves. No, she said, reaching for Emily's hand. That one's ours. And together they walked forward, not out of grief or obligation or blood, but because the world had finally made room for them to walk side by side as family.